People's Temple was founded in the 1950s by Jim Jones in the United States. It began as a church that promoted racial equality, socialism, and community support. At first, it appeared progressive and humanitarian, attracting people who believed they were part of something meaningful. Over time, Jim Jones consolidated power and positioned himself as the central authority. Followers were told he was a prophet, a savior, and the only source of truth. Independent thinking was discouraged, and loyalty to Jones became the foundation of the group's identity. Control inside the group intensified. Members were constantly monitored and required to confess personal thoughts and actions in front of others. These confessions were later used against them. Punishments included public humiliation, physical abuse, and isolation, reinforcing obedience through fear. Jones introduced staged healings and miracles to strengthen belief. He also conducted loyalty drills known as White Nights, where members rehearsed mass suicide scenarios. These drills normalized the idea of dying for the cause and tested how far followers would go. In the mid-1970s, the group relocated to Guyana in South America. They built a remote settlement called Jonestown, deep in the jungle. Over 900 people moved there, cutting themselves off from the outside world. Communication was restricted, and armed guards controlled the perimeter. Life in Jonestown was tightly controlled. Members worked long hours under harsh conditions, with limited food and constant surveillance. Passports and money were confiscated, making escape nearly impossible. Leaving the community was not allowed. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited Jonestown to investigate allegations of abuse. During his visit, several members requested to leave with him. As Ryan and his group attempted to depart, they were ambushed at a nearby airstrip. Ryan and 4 others were killed by cult members. Shortly after the attack, Jim Jones gathered the entire community. He announced that it was time for what he called revolutionary suicide. A drink mixed with cyanide was prepared and distributed among the members. Children were poisoned first, many of them by force. Adults were then instructed to drink. Some complied, while others resisted but were threatened or forcibly injected. Armed guards ensured the order was carried out. In total, over 900 people died, including more than 300 children. Aum Shinrikyo was founded in Japan in the 1980s by Shoko Asahara. He presented himself as a spiritual leader, claiming to be both Christ and an enlightened being with supernatural powers. The group combined elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, and apocalyptic Christianity into a single belief system centered around him. The cult attracted educated followers, including scientists, engineers, and medical professionals. Many believed they were part of a movement that would survive an end-time apocalyptic event and help rebuild the world afterward. This gave the group both ideological commitment and technical capability. Inside the organization, control was strict and hierarchical. Members underwent intense spiritual training, which included sleep deprivation, isolation, and physical stress. Loyalty to Asahara was absolute, and questioning him was not tolerated. Aum Shinrikyo began developing chemical and biological weapons in secret. They built laboratories and conducted experiments using toxic substances, including sarin nerve gas. The group believed that mass destruction would trigger a global awakening and fulfill their apocalyptic vision. In March 1995, the cult carried out a coordinated attack on the Tokyo subway system. Members released sarin gas during rush hour by puncturing bags of the chemical on multiple trains. The gas spread quickly through crowded stations and trains. The attack killed several people and injured thousands. Victims suffered from blindness, breathing failure, and long-term neurological damage. Emergency services struggled to respond due to the invisible nature of the gas. After the attack, investigations exposed the full scale of the cult's operations. Authorities discovered laboratories, chemical stockpiles, and evidence of prior crimes, including kidnappings and murders. The group had been preparing for large-scale destruction for years. Shoko Asahara and several key members were arrested and later convicted. Heaven's Gate was founded in the 1970s by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. They taught that Earth was about to be recycled, and that true believers could escape by leaving their human bodies and ascending to a higher level of existence. The group believed that extraterrestrial beings were guiding human evolution. According to their teachings, a spacecraft would arrive to take them to this next level. This idea became central to their identity and purpose. Members were required to completely detach from their previous lives. They gave up families, careers, and personal possessions. Individual identity was discouraged, and everyone followed the same strict rules, clothing, and behavior patterns. Daily life was highly controlled. Members followed routines focused on discipline, obedience, and suppression of personal desires. Some even underwent voluntary castration as part of eliminating human impulses. The group lived in isolation, often moving locations to avoid outside influence. Communication with the outside world was limited, and all decisions were directed by Applewhite, who held complete authority. In 1997, the appearance of the Hale-Bopp comet became a turning point. Applewhite taught that a spacecraft was traveling behind the comet and that this was their opportunity to leave Earth. He instructed members that the only way to board the spacecraft was to abandon their physical bodies. This meant death was not seen as an end, but as a transition to a higher existence. Over several days in March 1997, 39 members carried out a coordinated suicide. They consumed a mixture of substances and lay down in identical positions. Each person wore the same clothing and shoes, reinforcing the group's uniform identity. The bodies were discovered in a rented house in California. The scene was highly organized, reflecting the level of control and planning within the group. Heaven's Gate showed how belief in a higher purpose, combined with isolation and strict control, can lead individuals to willingly participate in their own deaths, fully convinced they are moving to something greater. NXIVM was founded in the late 1990s by Keith Raniere in the United States. It presented itself as a self-help and executive success program, offering courses on personal growth, leadership, and empowerment. On the surface, NXIVM attracted professionals, celebrities, and individuals looking to improve their lives. The organization used structured training programs, workshops, and coaching sessions to build trust and dependency among members. Behind this public image, a secret subgroup was created within NXIVM called DOS. This inner circle operated under a strict hierarchy of masters and slaves, where obedience to superiors was required at all times. Women recruited into DOS were required to provide collateral before joining. This included personal secrets, explicit photos, or damaging information that could be used against them if they tried to leave. This ensured silence and compliance. Members in the group were subjected to strict control over their daily lives. This included extreme dieting, sleep restriction, and constant monitoring. Communication with outsiders was discouraged, increasing isolation. One of the most disturbing practices was branding. Women were physically marked with a symbol using a cauterizing tool. The symbol was presented as a sign of empowerment, but it was later revealed to contain the initials of Keith Raniere. Raniere maintained control through psychological manipulation, presenting himself as a mentor while demanding loyalty and submission. Members were conditioned to believe that obedience was necessary for personal growth. Over time, reports of abuse began to surface. Investigations exposed the inner workings of DOS and the coercive practices used within the organization. The structure functioned as a system of control rather than empowerment. Keith Raniere was arrested and later convicted on charges including sex trafficking, forced labor, and racketeering. Several high-ranking members were also implicated in the operation. The Order of the Solar Temple was founded in the 1980s by Joseph DeMombro and Luke Cherie. The group combined elements of New Age spirituality, occult beliefs, and myths connected to the Knights Templar. The leaders taught that members were part of a chosen group preparing for a higher existence. They claimed that death was not the end, but a transition to a more advanced spiritual realm. This idea became central to the group's identity. The organization operated across multiple countries, including Switzerland, France, and Canada. It attracted educated and financially stable individuals, many of whom contributed significant money and resources to the group. Control within the cult was reinforced through secrecy and hierarchy. Members were divided into inner circles, with higher levels gaining access to deeper teachings. Loyalty to the leaders was absolute, and questioning was discouraged. DeMombro staged elaborate rituals and illusions to maintain authority. He used hidden devices and prearranged setups to create the appearance of supernatural events, reinforcing belief among followers. Over time, the teachings became more extreme. Members were told that a cosmic transition was approaching, and that they needed to leave Earth to reach a higher plane of existence. In 1994, a series of coordinated deaths occurred. Dozens of members were found dead in multiple locations. Many had been shot or drugged before being burned, indicating that not all deaths were voluntary. Additional incidents followed in the years after, bringing the total number of deaths to over 70. The events were presented within the group as a planned transition, but investigations revealed signs of coercion and staged execution. The deaths were organized in a ritualistic manner, with bodies arranged and locations prepared in advance. The Children of God was founded in the late 1960s by David Berg in the United States. It emerged during the counterculture movement and attracted young people searching for meaning, community, and spiritual purpose. The group promoted a mix of Christianity and unconventional teachings centered around Berg. He positioned himself as a prophetic leader, and his writings became the foundation of the group's beliefs. These writings, known as the Mo letters, were distributed among members and used to guide behavior. Over time, the content became increasingly extreme, redefining morality and normalizing controversial practices. The group introduced a concept called flirty fishing, where members, particularly women, were encouraged to use sexual relationships as a method of recruitment and support. This was presented as a form of spiritual outreach. Inside the group, strict control was maintained over members' lives. Individuals were expected to obey leadership, give up personal autonomy, and prioritize the group above family or outside connections. Children raised within the group were exposed to the same ideology from a young age. Reports and testimonies later described environments involving exploitation, lack of boundaries, and psychological control. The organization operated through decentralized communes across multiple countries, allowing it to expand while maintaining internal control structures. Movement between groups was common, reducing stability and increasing dependence. Over time, public scrutiny and legal pressure increased. The group attempted to rebrand and distance itself from earlier practices, eventually becoming known as the Family International. Despite these changes, former members and investigations have documented long-term effects of control, exploitation, and indoctrination within the group's earlier structure. The Branch Davidians were a religious group based in Waco, Texas, led by David Koresh. He claimed to be a prophetic figure with unique authority to interpret the Bible, particularly the Book of Revelation. Koresh positioned himself as the only one who could reveal divine truth. Followers believed he had a special role in an end-time apocalyptic event, which gave him complete control over the group's beliefs and decisions. Life inside the Mount Carmel compound was highly controlled. Members lived communally, separated from the outside world, and followed strict rules set by Koresh. Personal autonomy was limited, and obedience was expected. Koresh enforced controversial practices, including polygamy. He claimed spiritual justification for taking multiple wives, including relationships that were later widely criticized and investigated. The group began stockpiling weapons and supplies. This raised concern among authorities, who suspected illegal activity and potential threats. Surveillance of the compound increased over time. In 1993, federal agents attempted to execute a search warrant at the compound. This led to a violent confrontation between agents and members, resulting in deaths on both sides and triggering a prolonged standoff. The siege lasted 51 days. During this time, negotiations took place, but tensions remained high. The compound was surrounded, and pressure on the group intensified. In April 1993, federal forces launched an operation to end the standoff. Shortly after, a fire broke out inside the compound. The building was quickly engulfed in flames. More than 70 people died, including children. David Koresh was among the dead. The exact cause of the fire remains disputed, with differing accounts from authorities and survivors. The Manson family was a cult formed in the late 1960s in California, led by Charles Manson. He presented himself as a spiritual figure, using a mix of ideology, manipulation, and psychological control to influence his followers. Manson targeted young, vulnerable individuals, often those disconnected from society. He used drugs, isolation, and constant reinforcement to reshape their thinking and create dependence on him. Followers lived together at places like Spahn Ranch, cut off from normal life. Manson controlled their environment, relationships, and beliefs, gradually breaking down individual identity. He promoted a theory he called helter-skelter, which he described as an impending apocalyptic race war. He convinced followers that they had a role in triggering and surviving this event. Manson used music, repetition, and symbolic language to reinforce his ideas. Over time, his followers began to see him as a figure with absolute authority, beyond questioning. In 1969, Manson directed members of the group to carry out a series of murders. The attacks were brutal and targeted individuals chosen to create fear and chaos. One of the most well-known incidents involved the murder of actress Sharon Tate and others at her home. The killings were carried out by followers acting under Manson's influence. The crimes were intended to appear random and shocking, designed to escalate tension and contribute to the scenario Manson had described. The goal was to push society toward the conflict he predicted. After the murders, the group was eventually identified and arrested. Investigations revealed the extent of Manson's psychological control and the role he played in directing the violence. The Finders was a group investigated in the United States during the 1980s. It was described as a small, loosely organized community with unconventional living practices, but the case gained attention due to disturbing allegations involving children. In 1987, police in Florida stopped two men associated with the group. They were found with several children who appeared neglected and were unable to explain their situation clearly. This led to further investigation into the group's activities. Authorities later searched properties linked to the group, including a warehouse in Washington, D.C. Inside, they reported finding unusual materials such as coded documents, photographs, and items that raised concerns about possible ritualistic or organized activity. Some reports suggested potential links to child exploitation or trafficking. There were also claims that the group used structured systems and coded communication, indicating a level of organization beyond a typical commune. The case became more controversial when federal agencies became involved. Certain documents were classified, and parts of the investigation were reportedly limited or redirected. This led to speculation about whether the full scope of the group's activities was ever revealed. Despite the initial findings, no clear, publicly confirmed conclusion established the group as a large-scale criminal network. Some aspects of the case remained unresolved, and details were never fully clarified. The lack of transparency, combined with the nature of the evidence reported, contributed to ongoing speculation. Over time, the case became associated with broader theories about hidden networks and institutional cover-ups. Most of what is known comes from fragmented reports, official records, and later discussions. The absence of definitive answers has kept the case in a gray area between documented investigation and unresolved suspicion. The Process Church of the Final Judgment was founded in the 1960s by Robert de Grimston and Marianne McLean. It emerged during a period of social upheaval and attracted individuals interested in alternative spirituality and unconventional belief systems. The group developed a unique theology that combined elements of Christianity with opposing forces. It taught that Christ, Satan, Lucifer, and Jehovah were all aspects of a single divine reality. This idea of unity between good and evil became central to their belief system. Members were organized into a structured community with clear hierarchy and identity. They often wore black robes and used strong visual symbolism to represent their beliefs. Public presence and recruitment were part of their expansion strategy. The group published magazines and materials to spread its ideology. These writings emphasized duality, judgment, and an approaching transformation of humanity. Followers were encouraged to fully accept the group's interpretation of reality. Life inside the group required commitment and obedience. Members distanced themselves from mainstream society and aligned their identity with the movement's teachings. Leadership maintained influence through ideology rather than physical force. The Process Church gained attention due to its imagery and beliefs, which many people associated with darkness or extremism. It was often linked in public discussion to violent events, although direct involvement was never definitively proven. Controversy around the group was amplified by media coverage and speculation. This created a reputation that extended beyond confirmed facts, blending documented activity with unverified claims. Over time, the organization fragmented and restructured into different forms. Some branches moved away from the original teachings, while others maintained elements of the initial belief system. The Anthill Kids was a cult formed in Canada in the late 1970s, led by Roch Thériault. He presented himself as a religious figure with divine authority, claiming he had a special connection to God and the ability to guide his followers spiritually. The group lived in isolation in rural Quebec, cut off from mainstream society. Members were required to obey Thériault completely, and their daily lives were tightly controlled. Personal freedom was gradually removed as dependence on the leader increased. Thériault enforced strict discipline within the group. Punishments were severe and often framed as spiritual correction. Followers were conditioned to accept suffering as part of their devotion and growth. Over time, the abuse escalated. Thériault began performing medical procedures on members despite having no training. These included surgeries carried out without anesthesia in unsanitary conditions. Some members were subjected to extreme physical harm, including mutilation and removal of body parts. These acts were justified by the leader as necessary or divinely instructed, reinforcing his authority over life and health. Women in the group were particularly targeted, facing both physical and psychological abuse. The environment created fear, submission, and complete reliance on Thériault's decisions. Isolation played a key role in maintaining control. Members had little to no contact with the outside world, and leaving the group was difficult due to psychological conditioning and physical barriers. The situation continued until authorities intervened after reports of abuse surfaced. Investigations revealed the extent of the violence and control within the group. Roch Thériault was arrested and later convicted for multiple crimes related to abuse and murder. Survivors provided testimony about the conditions they endured under his leadership. The movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God was a cult formed in Uganda in the late 1980s. It was led by Joseph Kibwetere and Credonia Mimbarant, who claimed to receive visions and messages from the Virgin Mary. The group focused on strict adherence to the Ten Commandments and preached that the world was nearing its end. Followers believed they were chosen to survive an impending apocalypse and achieve salvation through obedience. Members were required to give up personal possessions and cut ties with outsiders. Communication was heavily restricted, and silence was often enforced as a form of discipline. This created an environment of control and isolation. The leaders set a specific date for the end of the world. As the date approached, followers became more committed, believing they were preparing for a final transition to a higher state of existence. When the prophecy failed, tension within the group increased. Followers who had sacrificed everything began questioning the leadership, creating instability inside the movement. In March 2000, hundreds of members gathered at a church in Kanangu. The building was sealed, and a fire broke out, killing everyone inside. Initial reports suggested a mass suicide linked to their beliefs. However, further investigation revealed additional bodies in mass graves at other locations connected to the group. Many victims showed signs that indicated the deaths may not have been voluntary. The total number of deaths exceeded 700, making it one of the largest cult-related mass death events in modern history. The scale and coordination suggested planning rather than a spontaneous act. Authorities concluded that the event was likely orchestrated by the leadership, possibly to maintain control after the failed prophecy and prevent dissent from spreading. The Rajneesh movement was founded in the 1970s by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho. It began as a spiritual movement combining meditation, philosophy, and unconventional ideas about freedom and self-expression. In the early 1980s, the group established a large commune in Oregon called Rajneeshpuram. Thousands of followers moved there, creating a self-contained community with its own infrastructure, leadership, and internal systems. Control within the commune was managed by a close inner circle, led by Ma Anand Sheela. She oversaw daily operations and enforced authority through strict organization and surveillance. Loyalty to leadership was expected, and dissent was discouraged. As the commune grew, conflicts with local residents and authorities increased. Legal disputes and political tensions escalated, leading the group to take more aggressive actions to maintain influence and control. In 1984, members of the Inner Circle carried out a bioterror attack in a nearby town. They contaminated salad bars and restaurants with salmonella bacteria in an attempt to influence a local election by incapacitating voters. The attack affected hundreds of people, causing widespread illness. It became one of the first documented bioterror incidents in the United States. Investigations later revealed additional activities within the group, including wiretapping, poisoning plots, and internal power struggles. The leadership had begun using criminal methods to protect and expand their control. As evidence surfaced, authorities intervened. Key leaders, including Ma Anand Sheela, were arrested and convicted on multiple charges related to the crimes. Bhagwan Rajneesh left the United States, and the commune eventually collapsed. The movement itself continued in different forms, but the Oregon operation ended. The Source family was a cult formed in the late 1960s in Los Angeles, led by Jim Baker, who later called himself Father Yod. He was a former Marine and restaurant owner who began presenting himself as a spiritual leader. The group was centered around the Source restaurant, a popular health food location in Hollywood. It attracted young people interested in alternative lifestyles, spirituality, and counterculture ideas. Followers moved into a communal living environment where Father Yod held complete authority. Members were expected to follow his guidance in all aspects of life, including relationships, behavior, and belief. The group combined elements of mysticism, Eastern philosophy, and New Age spirituality. Rituals, meditation, and music were used to reinforce identity and connection within the group. Father Yod maintained multiple partners within the group, presenting it as part of his spiritual role. Relationships were structured around his authority, and members were expected to accept his position without question. Daily life involved strict routines, including diet control, group activities, and isolation from outside influence. Members adopted new names and identities, further separating themselves from their past lives. The group also formed a music band called Yahowah 13, using it as both expression and reinforcement of their beliefs. Music became part of the group's internal culture and messaging. In 1975, Father Yod died during a hang gliding accident. His death disrupted the structure of the group, which had been centered entirely around his leadership. After his death, the community began to dissolve. Without the central authority figure, members gradually left and returned to independent lives. Love Is One was a small online-based cult led by Amy Carlson, who referred to herself as Mother God. She claimed to be a divine being who had lived multiple past lives and was guiding humanity towards spiritual ascension. The group used live streams and social media to recruit followers. Once inside, daily life revolved around devotion to Carlson and her teachings. She was treated as the central authority in all decisions. The group promoted unconventional and harmful practices, including extreme detox methods. One of the most notable was the use of colloidal silver, which members believed had healing properties despite known health risks. As Carlson's health declined, followers continued to reinforce the belief that she was undergoing a spiritual transformation rather than a physical illness. This prevented proper medical intervention. Control within the group was maintained through constant reinforcement of belief. Members repeated ideas about ascension, divine missions, and cosmic purpose, creating a closed system of thinking. In 2021, Carlson died while still surrounded by followers. Instead of reporting her death immediately, members preserved her body and continued to treat her as a divine figure. Her body was kept in a decorated setting, and followers believed she remained spiritually active.